Hey there friends, my name is Jim and today I thought we'd get a little bit conspiratorial. You may have heard of an organization known as the World Economic Forum. Its name has been in and out of the news in the last, 4 years, and there's good reason why. It's a shady group of politicians and business magnates from all over the world who get together to share their knowledge and help move the future towards what they refer to as inclusive capitalism. Now, with the pandemic basically over, I guess, at this point, with the media appetite moving from plague to war, I figured it would be a good time to give you guys a quick rundown on exactly how all of this fits into today's world, and hopefully once I'm done you'll have some idea of just how badly they want to control every aspect of your life. So, follow me down the rabbit hole. Now, before we get into all the horrible plans the system has laid out for me and you, I want to remind you that talking about this kind of stuff is exactly what YouTube does not want on its platform. Therefore, the only way that this information gets out is if people like you share it. So if you think this is worth hearing, please click the link in the video, copy it, send it to a friend, like, share, subscribe, comment, and if you think what I feel is, if you feel what I do is actually valuable, feel free to visit me on Patreon or Locals or any of the support links below, and let's get into it. So the World Economic Forum has been around for a while, but it first gained online prominence about a year and a half ago when they released a video that was ostensibly to show us how awesome they plan to make the world. Now, unfortunately for them, they didn't see the backlash coming for the video. Apparently, when they put the phrase, "In 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy," they thought that was going to go down like gangbusters, so they ended up taking the video down. Luckily enough, schizoid conspiracy theorists were quick on the jump to make sure to save it because this was a blatant control scheme. So let me just refresh you by showing you that video so we can have a little bit of a chat about it. Let's go. Now, if you've never seen that video before, it might surprise you that it wasn't made by 9/11 truthers or the Great Awakening Q crowd, but a multinational organization actively moving towards these goals. Now, just in case you didn't quite put together how these are applying to us, I want to break them down one by one for just a moment. So, 1. Own nothing and be happy. Meaning, everything will be rented. This is interesting because during the pandemic, through a honestly ridiculous series of bureaucratic red tape dodging, the CDC was able to declare a moratorium on rental payments, if you remember that. For a full year, the boomers and, Gen Xers who had spent all their whole lives saving up to buy 1 or maybe 2 properties to rent were denied the ability to kick out tenants who would refuse to pay. Naturally, this meant that the normie people like you and me, who can't take a $40,000 to $60,000 a year pay cut, or who knows, 100, 150, depends on the amount of properties you have, right? They would have to sell their properties in order to make ends meet. And this happened for thousands of renters all over the United States. Maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know. Everybody who was renting, if anybody wanted to, they could decide not to pay rent. And there were states fighting against this, but for the most part, for a whole year, you couldn't kick people out of your properties. And there were people who were massively taking advantage of that. So, unfortunately for them, now they need to sell their properties they can't recoup their money on. Nobody's really buying because it's a pandemic, and they wouldn't want to buy buildings that they had no possibility of renting out. So there was only one buyer on the market, surprisingly enough, an investment firm called BlackRock. The same BlackRock, which is a member organization for the World Economic Forum. They're very interested in turning every part of our economy into gig work, where you go rent your car from them, to go to work for them, to pay them for your rental apartment, where they can sell you subscriptions for their Amazon subsidiary grocery delivery service, and every dollar that circulates throughout the economy goes through them. Then, when you get depressed from your boring cookie-cutter life, they'll diagnose it as depression and send you to their subscription psychiatrist so they can give you pills to make you feel comfortable that you'll pay for by the month. This way, sooner or later, you'll own nothing, and you'll be happy. So that brings us on to 2, which is that the US will no longer be a global superpower. Obviously, that's kind of the goal of all these weird pseudo-fascist, communist, whatever you want to call them, organizations. But they want the world markets to be controlled through a conglomerate of corporations that run themselves as governments through the United Nations. They believe that governments are relics of an old world, and the natural road for the world to take is corporate control. They aren't wrong either. Many companies now outshine the entire nations as far as world control goes, as far as money getting pushed in and out of the system and things like that. Moving on to number 3, we will begin printing organs. Now, this one is less outright obviously evil. They had to throw some things like that in to balance out the absolutely insanity from some of the other ones. But I would be silly not to point out that 3D printed organs move us closer to a future of transhumanism. A future excitedly being planned for by World Economic Forum CEO Klaus Schwab. Let him explain what will happen in what he calls the 4th Industrial Revolution.
It's at the end, what the 4th Industrial Revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities. When I wrote the book, I started to write it for years ago. It was published 3 years ago. It was sold, very interesting, over 1 million times in the world. And what is interesting is that 800,000 copies, more than 800,000 copies of those 2 million were sold in 3 countries alone: China, Japan, and South Korea. And you may be interested, who was the biggest buyer with 16,000 copies at the same time? It was the Korean military. Because the 4th Industrial Revolution will have a major impact also on warfare.
So ignoring the absolutely terrifying implications of all that stuff, I'll just move right along to number 4, no more meat consumption. In the eyes of global corporations like the World Economic Forum, meat is simply too high cost and low reward. It takes up too much space that could be used for more production. It's much easier to move everybody towards the idea of sustainability through meat replacements, which are actually just different types of plant protein mixed with seed oils. They're not really usually that good for you. And the eventual goal of having humanity move towards bug farming is the main source of protein. I'm sure that sounds pretty crazy, but I'm sure I haven't been the only one to notice that the major news sites have pushed bug eating particularly hard on us the last few years in the name of climate change. The mantra that's become to encompass this ideal online for us who are trying to avoid it is that I will not eat the bugs and I will not live in the pod. Because after all, we are interchangeable economic units. Who cares if you have actually quality of life, as long as you continue to consume and produce for the masters who decide what you actually do with that life. Again, number 5 was the same old story of refugees. According to them, the climate in the Middle East will be desertified in our lifetimes. Whether or not the climate change science is correct or not really doesn't matter, because it's just another tool used to push disparate cultures together and get them fighting. Because if we're quarreling with ourselves, we won't notice our nations being parasitized by the 1% who actually make these decisions that piss us off and push us together in the first place. Then number 6 was governments will pay for carbon, leading to a zero carbon future, meaning that they would enforce a global carbon tax on every country in the world. That would necessitate that to get to that end goal. More fear-mongering for the cattle in there, but instead of focusing on that, I'd like to ask you, how would one accomplish that? Especially a group with no official governmental power. What will they do about another country continuing to use fossil fuels unless the corporate governance in charge has more powers than those countries do? This is simply a call to scare you into giving them the power to rein in foreign governments in the name of environmentalism. And of course, the last couple of points are just about space and how we need to keep checks and balances in place, which is obvious pandering to the lefty crowd who has replaced the religion of their ancestors with the religion of the state. Oh, if we give up all our inalienable rights, then maybe Science Man will take us to space with him. No, don't worry, they said in their video that we need checks and balances. It's fine. So, the head honcho in charge of all this was the guy you saw in that last video, a man by the name of Professor Klaus Schwab. He's made his goals for humanity perfectly clear in the last decade or so, speaking at hundreds of events, and those videos are all over YouTube. I highly recommend that you don't believe anything I say and check out what he actually says as the man himself. There's actually one video that got pretty popular during the trucker protest in Canada when he spelled out how the World Economic Forum has gotten so much power in so little time. The video was leaked in 2017 during a meeting with its Young Global Leaders Foundation, and I think it would behoove you to see it to give you a bit more of an idea of just how insidious this whole society is.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. Mm-hmm. I'm here with the president, who is a young global leader, but what is important?
There is so much to go through with these people that I won't be able to get through it all in one short video, but I will continue to expose them as they pop up. For now, let's break this down a little. So according to the leader of this group, more than half of Trudeau's cabinets were inserted for the specific purpose of moving Canada more towards the globalist future that they desire. You might have heard that Vladimir Putin was also part of the program, that is, up until 2 weeks ago when he invaded Ukraine. Clearly, that wasn't part of the plan. The WEF is obsessed with the idea of a single globalized world, which they control through their thousands of partner companies, and now they'll work in a multipolar world with several different superpowers that the UN can't control and whose wheels you have to grease individually. It'll be fun to continue to watch them to see how the machinations of the most powerful elites in the world continue to go against this. However, they do seem to like the idea of a powerful authoritarian China. As a matter of fact, Klaus Schwab has said time and time again how much he respects Xi Jinping, including this last year during the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland meeting, where he introduced Xi Jinping with a long, weird, rambling, complimenting introduction. It was strange, and you can find it on YouTube. He was talking about how China is a model for the rest of the world to follow, with their facial recognition cameras on every corner and their social credit database that keeps track of everyone at all times to watch for signs of government loyalty or subversion. You have to admit, if you're a crazy person looking to control massive amounts of people down to the thoughts they think, then the CCP is a pretty good group to replicate. If you think that's an exaggeration, let's take a look at the words from one of the World Economic Foundation young global leaders himself, named Wang Guan, when he was talking about the internment camps for Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region of China. Okay. Revealed. World Economic Forum leader advocates China-style re-education camps used for Uyghur genocide. The World Economic Forum named Wang Guan as one of the young global leaders in 2021, just a year ago. Wang Guan, a World Economic Forum young global leader, has repeatedly advocated for the Chinese Communist Party's re-education camps weaponized by the regime against Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Wang, who works as a chief political correspondent for a Chinese state-run media outlet's American programming, is one of 112 young global leaders selected by Chairman Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum. The WEF has become notorious for globalist intervention around the world, including but not limited to pushing for the, quote, Great Reset, unquote, amid COVID-19. The group seeks to abolish property ownership at its core, summarizing this objective through its controversial expression, you'll own nothing and be happy. The Chinese Communist Party-linked journalist and China Global Television Network host has repeatedly defended the Chinese Communist Party's genocide of Uyghurs, an ethnic minority in Xinjiang province. Wang has euphemized the concentration camps where Uyghurs are forced to live in as re-education camps, appearing in several interviews and videos attempting to point out the success and efficacy of the program. In a short film where Wang visited Xinjiang and talked with the Uyghurs, all of whom dispelled accusations against the Chinese Communist Party, as you would, For carrying out ethnic cleansing, he appeared to defend the use of concentration camps. Quote, 54 countries, most of them Muslim-majority states, defended China's counter-extremism efforts in Xinjiang, commending China in its development policies there and in, quote, providing care to its Muslim citizens, unquote, he explained before adding, quote, and they probably have a point. The feature, Western Double Standards on Xinjiang Busted, also presented several survivors of China's, quote, re-education camps, unquote, suggesting their internment provided them with skills and life for work. So this is basically talking about the state media of China and how their documentaries were trying to disprove the Xinjiang Uyghur Muslim camps. And those are, of course, the same people who Klaus Schwab considers young global leaders, moving our world more towards economic unity, less disparity, whatever these kind of words they use, for getting themselves in the position of power, specifically in order to make you one of the lesser. And of course, as was just in that article, you can't really talk about the World Economic Forum or Professor Schwab himself without mentioning the Great Reset. You may have heard this called a conspiracy theory by most of the mainstream media, which is weird considering it's the title of Klaus Schwab's first book, The Great Reset, which was chock full of really boring platitudes about inclusive capitalism and equitable world markets. But if you have the time to slog through the bullshit, it's pretty clear what they want. Let's take a quick look at the Great Reset page of the World Economic Forum's website. One sec. So as you can see, this is weforum.org/Great Reset. If they ever want to tell you that the Great Reset is a conspiracy, here you go. There is an urgent need for global stakeholders to cooperate in simultaneously managing the direct consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. To improve the state of the World Economic Forum is starting the Great Reset Initiative. And what is the Great Reset Initiative about, you ask? Well, the context. The COVID-19 crisis and the political, economic, and social disruptions it has caused is fundamentally changing the traditional context for decision-making. The inconsistencies, inadequacies, and contradictions of multiple systems, from health and financial to energy and education, are more exposed than ever amidst a global context of concern for lives, livelihoods, and the planet. Leaders find themselves at a historic crossroads, managing short-term pressures against medium and long-term uncertainties. Now, what's the opportunity? As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative will offer insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations and the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of a global commons. Drawing from the vision and vast expertise of the leaders engaged across the forum's communities, including people like Wang Chen, who you just heard about, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of every human being, except for maybe the Uyghur Muslims and whatever minority we consider less important when we need to divide you. It seems, however, the fear needed to make a global shift that massive had stopped for a time. During the spread of the Delta strain of SARS-CoV-2, I'm sure you remember, the vaccine narrative was going hard. We had the most people being vaccinated since the start of the hesitancy from the Johnson & Johnson clot recall, and it seemed like people would give up every right our forefathers had fought so hard for, when suddenly a strange thing happened. New strains started spreading that was different than the others. It seemed to inoculate you naturally to different variants while being much more tolerable to people than Delta had been, and suddenly they no longer had the entire populace under a never-ending wave of fear. This would make it very difficult to move towards the same kinds of digital IDs that places like China has, as many World Economic Forum leaders had been pushing for. But you didn't think they'd give up there, did you? Suddenly, as people were starting to stand up to their governments and freedom convoys were being planned around the world, Vladimir Putin, a World Economic Forum member at the time, decided to invade a sovereign country, and now it seems as if we have moved from the disease to war, from the pale horse of revelation to the red horse. Not much farther to go now. Anyways, I hope that was enlightening, and again, this isn't meant to be an all-encompassing list of every plan the World Economic Forum has in the works right now, but it gives you a place to start. If anyone in power in your part of the world is a member of the WEF, I would suggest you think about whether their world is one you would want to live in. Anyways, you guys have a great night. Again, please copy the URL to this, send it to your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whoever. People need to know about this. And please like, share, subscribe, comment below, tell me how I'm wrong. And if you think what I do is valuable, feel free to check me out in the support links below.